Echoes of eras, the crystal skulls, alien artifacts or hoax. They gleam beneath museum lights, smooth and silent, their hollow eyes capturing reflections of 1,000 curious faces. Crystal skulls, objects of fascination, skepticism, and awe. Some call them relics of ancient gods, others the handiwork of clever artisans. But whoever shaped them, they continue to whisper across centuries, carrying a mystery that refuses to fade. Our journey begins in the jungles of Central America, where the ruins of the Maya and Aztec empires sleep beneath thick canopies of time. Among their stones and symbols, stories speak of skulls carved from living crystal, tools of prophecy, keys to knowledge, and echoes of lost civilizations. When explorers and adventurers first brought them to Europe in the 19th century, the world was captivated. These skulls seemed to confirm every romantic dream of a vanished super race, a civilization with powers beyond our own. The most famous of all was said to be discovered in 1924 by British explorer F.A. Mitchell Hedges. According to legend, his adopted daughter Anna found the crystal skull beneath a collapsed altar in the ruins of Lubantun in Belize. It was flawless, carved from a single piece of clear quartz and eerily lifelike. Rumors claimed it could start fires, transmit visions, or even speak when moonlight struck it. Newspapers called it the Skull of Doom, a relic so perfect that no modern craftsman could reproduce it. For decades, that single object would shape everything people believed about the crystal skull mystery. But legends, like quartz, can be both clear and deceptive. When historians revisited the tale, they found no record of the skull at Lubantun's excavation sites. In fact, evidence suggested it surfaced only after the 1930s, when Mitchell Hedge had already returned to England. Receipts later revealed that the skull had been purchased from a London auction house, one that had ties to curio dealers in Paris and Mexico. The story of the jungle discovery, it seemed, might have been born not from archaeology, but from imagination. Still, the skull's perfection was undeniable. Under magnification, it revealed extraordinary craftsmanship. The jaw carved separately, but fitting precisely into its sockets. The surfaces polished until light flowed through them like water. How could such precision exist without modern tools? That question became the foundation of decades of speculation. Soon, other crystal skulls began to appear. In Paris, in London, in the Smithsonian. Each was said to come from ancient sites, yet none had verifiable excavation records. Many traced back to the same source, Eugene Bobin, a French antiquities dealer active in the late 1800s who sold Mesoamerican artifacts to European collectors. Bobin's inventory included not only skulls, but other quartz carvings, crosses, idols, and animals, all claimed to be Aztec. Later analysis would reveal that some of these objects bore tool marks made by rotary wheels, instruments unknown in pre-Columbian times. As museums grew more rigorous in their authentication methods, doubts mounted. Microscopic study by the British Museum and the Smithsonian Institution in the early 2000s revealed that the skulls had been shaped using modern abrasives. Their smooth symmetry, once seen as proof of alien or lost civilization technology, turned out to reflect the precision of 19th-century European lapidary craft. Yet rather than ending the legend, the revelations only deepened it. If the skulls were indeed modern, why had they been made in the first place? And why did so many people, scientists, mystics, and ordinary visitors still feel something uncanny in their presence? Even skeptics admitted that the artistry was extraordinary. Quartz is one of the hardest minerals on Earth, and carving it into a human likeness requires both patience and vision. Whether ancient or modern, the sculptors had achieved something beyond imitation, an object that seemed alive. Under shifting light, the skulls appeared to breathe, their inner fractures catching and bending illumination as though thought itself were moving behind the eyes. In time, the debate spread beyond museums into popular imagination. Writers suggested that the skulls were relics of Atlantis, data crystals from extraterrestrial visitors, or remnants of an ancient global civilization lost to catastrophe. Archaeologists rejected these ideas as fantasy, but they could not suppress the fascination. Some mysteries endure not because they hide secrets, but because they reflect our desire to keep searching. By the mid-20th century, the skulls had become fixtures of occult and metaphysical literature. They appeared in novels, lectures, and even film serials. To believers, they were talismans of wisdom. To skeptics, cautionary examples of how myth and marketing intertwine. Yet somewhere between belief and doubt lies curiosity, the spark that drives both science and myth alike. And it was curiosity that would soon lead investigators back to the skulls, not as relics of the gods, but as puzzles of human ingenuity. Thus begins the modern chapter of their story, the era of analysis, of microscopes and lasers, of skeptics and seekers confronting one another across the same table of polished stone. The crystal skulls would become laboratories not only of material science, but of belief itself, a stage on which the ancient drama between reason and wonder would play once more. As the 20th century advanced, the mystery of the crystal skulls deepened through conflict between science and speculation. Scholars of Mesoamerican archaeology dismissed them as European fakes, while spiritualists claimed they were tools of ancient power. Both sides believed themselves to be defenders of truth, yet both were drawn to the same question: why did these objects affect people so profoundly? In 1960, the Smithsonian Institution received its own crystal skull, a translucent piece about the size of a human head. It had been donated by a man who insisted it was an ancient Aztec artifact purchased in Mexico City decades earlier. Museum scientists studied it carefully under polarized light and high magnification. The results were clear: traces of metal tools, linear striations, and rotary wheel polishing, evidence impossible for pre-Columbian artisans to have produced. The skull, they concluded, was carved sometime in the 1800s, most likely in Europe. Yet even with this conclusion, visitors continued to stand before it in awe. Many reported a strange pull, a sensation of quiet reverence. Curators noted how often people lingered, how some reached out a tentative hand before catching themselves, as if expecting the object to respond. The skull's allure was undeniable, regardless of origin. Psychologists began to take notice. Some proposed that the fascination arose from what they called pareidolia, the tendency of the human mind to find life in lifeless shapes. A crystal skull, clear yet human, evoked both familiarity
and strangeness, triggering empathy and unease in equal measure. To gaze into it was to see oneself reflected, yet transformed, a face made of light and silence. The effect was universal. Whether one believed in its mystical power or not, the skull commanded attention. Meanwhile, technology advanced. By the 1970s, new instruments allowed scientists to map the internal structure of quartz in greater detail. These studies confirmed that natural crystal contains planes of weakness, invisible to the naked eye, which complicate carving. Modern lapidaries could work around these flaws using diamond-tipped tools, equipment unavailable before the Industrial Revolution. Thus, the conclusion strengthened. The skulls were modern creations. But facts alone rarely end a legend. The human mind resists tidy resolutions, especially when mystery offers a sense of meaning. For many, the skulls symbolized a connection to something greater, a link between science and spirit, between ancient Earth and cosmic consciousness. And where meaning thrives, myth follows. In the decades that followed, the skulls moved from dusty museum shelves to the shelves of bookstores and television screens. Paranormal researchers, inspired by both fascination and frustration, began to ask new questions. If the skulls were not ancient, could they still hold unknown properties? Quartz, after all, has long been associated with energy and resonance. It drives our watches, stabilizes radio frequencies, and stores data in modern computing. Could it, under certain conditions, interact with the human mind? It was during this period that stories of the skull's powers multiplied. Witnesses claimed they emitted faint sounds, changed temperature, or produced flashes of light. Others reported dreams and visions after spending time near them. No scientific test confirmed these phenomena, yet the accounts shared a pattern. They reflected the deep psychological need to experience connection between matter and mind, past and present. The growing fascination coincided with an era of cultural upheaval. The 1960s and 1970s saw a resurgence of interest in altered states of consciousness, meditation, and Eastern philosophy. The crystal skulls, clear and luminous, seemed to embody that search for inner clarity. They offered not proof, but metaphor. By the late 1970s, television documentaries began to feature them. The skulls appeared alongside pyramids, UFOs, and lost continents, a visual shorthand for mystery itself. Each program recycled the same central claim, that these objects were beyond the capacity of known technology. Even as experts countered these assertions, public fascination grew. Mystery, it seemed, was more compelling than certainty. In response, scientists sought to ground the discussion. Researchers in materials science examined the quartz under electron microscopes, identifying characteristic patterns of wheel cutting that confirmed modern manufacture. Archaeologists compared the skulls to verified pre-Columbian artifacts, noting vast differences in style and technique. Their findings were consistent. The skulls were not ancient. But no amount of evidence could quite erase the feeling that something inhuman, something larger, lingered behind those transparent eyes. The debate reflected a broader tension in the modern world, the struggle between empirical knowledge and the longing for enchantment. As technology explained more of nature, many feared that mystery itself was vanishing. Objects like the crystal skulls offered resistance to that loss, embodying the hope that some corners of existence remained unreachable to science. They were relics of wonder in an age of reason. By the 1980s, the conversation would shift again. The focus turned from archaeology to metaphysics, from origin to purpose. If the skulls were not ancient, perhaps they were timeless, symbols through which human consciousness could explore itself. This transformation would soon set the stage for a new wave of interpretations, where spirituality and science began to intertwine in ways neither camp could have predicted. The skulls were about to enter the modern age of inquiry, an age where quantum theory, consciousness studies, and the boundaries of belief would all converge upon these same enigmatic faces of crystal.
As the 1980s gave way to the dawn of the digital age, the crystal skulls began to shift from relics of the past to icons of the future. They were no longer seen merely as archaeological curiosities, but as bridges between matter and mind, between ancient myth and modern science. Their transparency became symbolic, a metaphor for the human desire to see through the veil of the unknown. It was in this era that the language of energy began to merge with the language of physics. Quartz, once prized for its beauty, was now known to have remarkable properties. It could oscillate at precise frequencies, hold electrical charge, and regulate the flow of information. The same mineral used to carve these enigmatic skulls also pulsed within every quartz watch, every early computer, every radio transmitter. To those inclined toward mysticism, this seemed no coincidence. The crystal skulls, they claimed, were not relics of superstition, but as remnants of a science more advanced than ours, a technology of consciousness itself. Writers and speakers within the New Age movement took up the cause. They spoke of crystalline intelligence, of vibrations, frequencies, and energy fields. Some claimed the skulls stored knowledge, like cosmic hard drives encoded by civilizations that predated recorded history. Others said they were communication devices, capable of linking human thought to extraterrestrial minds. These ideas found fertile ground in an age obsessed with both ancient astronauts and quantum mechanics. As scientists probed the mysteries of the subatomic world, mystics saw reflections of their own language in the new physics. Energy and matter, observer and observed, boundaries blurred, and the skulls became emblems of that unity. The stories grew even more elaborate. A legend took hold that there were 13 master skulls, each representing a key to human evolution. When brought together, they would awaken a network of consciousness, revealing truths about humanity's origin and destiny. No evidence supported the tale, yet its narrative power was undeniable. 13, the number of lunar cycles, of transformation, of cosmic alignment. It felt ancient even if it was new. And so seekers began to travel, searching for the missing skulls said to be hidden in temples, caves, or private collections. Among these was a British spiritualist named Joanne Parks, who in the 1980s came to possess a clear quartz skull known as Max. She claimed it had been given to her by a Tibetan healer and that it emitted distinct tones and frequencies when meditated upon. To believers, Max was alive, a conscious entity that could communicate telepathically. Skeptics dismissed this as wishful thinking, yet the phenomenon spread. More skulls appeared,
each with a name: Shannara, E.T., Amar, Synergy. Their keepers described them not as objects, but as companions, teachers, even repositories of wisdom. Gatherings and ceremonies began to form around them, events where people would meditate in their presence, reporting visions, emotions, or sudden bursts of insight. From a sociological view, this was more than spiritual eccentricity. It was the birth of a modern mythos. The skulls had transcended their material existence and become symbolic technology, conduits for meaning in an age increasingly defined by data and machines. They mirrored humanity's growing entanglement with its own creations, reflecting both the fear and the fascination of artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the unknown. Meanwhile, scientists continued their work. In laboratories, quartz was being studied for its ability to store vast amounts of data. By the late 1990s, researchers had successfully encoded digital information within crystal structures, not as metaphor, but as fact. The idea that crystal could hold memory was no longer mystical poetry, it was a field of study. This convergence between myth and science gave the skulls a strange validation. Even if their ancient origins were false, their symbolic truth seemed to anticipate the technology of the future. They were, in a sense, prophetic. And yet, the more the mystical movement embraced the skulls, the more determined skeptics became to dismantle the myths. In 1992, the British Museum conducted a comprehensive study using electron microscopy and advanced spectroscopy. The results were definitive. The tool marks were modern, the materials inconsistent with any pre-Columbian artifact. The carving techniques matched those used by 19th-century European workshops in Germany, particularly in Idar Oberstein, a center for quartz carving. The skulls were beautiful, but they were not ancient. They were masterpieces of art, not archaeology. For believers, however, the scientific verdict mattered little. They argued that the skull's origins could be modern, while their energy remained timeless. After all, quartz itself was ancient, born from the Earth's molten depths. Perhaps, they said, the carvers had been guided, their hands moved by forces beyond understanding. Science could measure the marks of tools, but not the intentions of the unseen. Television and film soon amplified the legend. Documentaries blurred fact and speculation, while fiction wove the skulls into tales of lost civilizations and alien contact. In popular imagination, they became keys to forgotten realms. Even skeptics found themselves drawn to their aesthetic, the perfection of their surfaces, the haunting suggestion of life within stone. By the early 2000s, the story reached a new climax with renewed scientific scrutiny. Institutions like the Smithsonian and the British Museum released formal reports concluding that none of the known crystal skulls could be traced to authentic archaeological digs. They were, in essence, the product of a 19th-century fascination with the exotic and the occult. Yet their fame continued to grow. Books, websites, and conferences multiplied. The skulls had entered the cultural bloodstream. And then came the resurgence of a familiar idea, that even hoaxes can hold power, not because they deceive, but because they reveal something deeper about us. Perhaps, said some anthropologists, The legend of the crystal skulls was not about the past at all. It was about the future, about how human beings construct meaning, how myth and memory merge in the search for transcendence. Whether carved in 1500 or 1850, the skulls had become mirrors of belief. The 21st century would take that metaphor even further. As digital consciousness and virtual reality began to reshape human identity. In that new context, the skulls seemed prophetic again, relics of a time when humans tried to hold the infinite in their hands, to see eternity through the eyes of crystal.
By the dawn of the 21st century, the crystal skulls stood at a crossroads. Science had stripped away their ancient disguise, yet their mystique remained untouched. To understand why, researchers turned their attention not to the skulls themselves, but to those who believed in them. If the artifacts were modern, why did they continue to inspire awe, visions, and faith? What was it about a simple piece of quartz that stirred the imagination so powerfully? Neuroscientists proposed that the answer lay in the mind's relationship with symmetry and reflection. The human brain, they noted, is attuned to faces, even partial or abstract ones. A crystal skull, with its flawless geometry and lifelike proportions, activates the same regions of the brain that respond to human presence. It seems alive because, in a sense, we make it so. The brain projects consciousness into the void, and the void reflects it back. Psychologists studying religious and paranormal experience took interest in the phenomenon. They found that participants who believed they were in the presence of a sacred or powerful object often exhibited measurable physiological responses, elevated heart rate, altered brainwave activity, changes in galvanic skin response. Belief itself, it appeared, could shape perception. And quartz, with its cold clarity and refracted light, provided the perfect screen for that projection. At the same time, physicists studying quartz on the microscopic level discovered phenomena that reignited wonder. Crystals, they observed, have the capacity to resonate, to oscillate at precise frequencies when energy passes through them. This property, known as the piezoelectric effect, allows quartz to convert mechanical pressure into electrical signals and vice versa. It was not mystical energy, but measurable physics, the same principle behind microphones, watches, and sensors. But to those seeking spiritual explanations, it offered a bridge between the tangible and the transcendental. Energy, vibration, resonance, the language of science and mysticism intertwined. Parapsychologists working at the margins of academia conducted experiments to test whether quartz could amplify consciousness or store psychic impressions. The results were inconclusive but intriguing. Some claimed that individuals could influence the electrical activity of quartz crystals under controlled meditation. Others argued that the effects were the product of expectation, that the human mind, when focused, could produce measurable changes in its environment through attention alone. Whether real or imagined, the experience remained deeply human, a conversation between mind and matter. Meanwhile, archaeologists continued their work with renewed precision. Advanced imaging techniques revealed that the supposed ancient skulls had been shaped with rotating wheels coated in abrasives, techniques developed in Europe in the mid-1800s.
Their symmetry was too perfect, their tool marks too uniform. Yet within the same studies came a humbling realization. Even with modern tools, replicating that craftsmanship required extraordinary skill. The artisans of the 19th century had achieved something remarkable: the creation of objects so flawless they could fool science for generations. Perhaps the true mystery was not ancient technology, but the enduring human genius for illusion. As the investigations deepened, so too did the philosophical questions. If the skulls were hoaxes, what did their popularity reveal about humanity's relationship with truth? Why did so many people prefer a beautiful myth over a mundane fact? Anthropologists studying the social life of objects began to see the skulls as examples of what they called mythic technologies, creations that function not by utility but by narrative power. They operate as vessels of meaning, transmitting belief across generations regardless of empirical proof. In that sense, the skulls were successful precisely because they were misunderstood. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the crystal skulls continued to draw both pilgrims and scientists. Laboratories tested them for trace elements and isotope composition. Psychics claimed to receive messages through them. In both camps, the same pattern emerged: an unyielding fascination with the boundaries of knowledge. The scientist asked what could be proven. The mystic asked what could be felt. And between those questions, the skulls gleam silently, reflecting both the microscope and the candle flame. Then something unexpected happened. As digital technology advanced, researchers began experimenting with data storage in quartz, literally encoding information in crystal lattices using lasers. In 2013, scientists successfully stored entire libraries of data in crystal glass, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the King James Bible. Suddenly, the metaphor had come full circle. The idea of crystals as memory was no longer fantasy, it was fact. The skulls, long dismissed as pseudo-scientific props, now appeared eerily prophetic. Had our ancestors, or perhaps their imitators, intuited something profound about the nature of information and matter? Even skeptics admitted the irony. The myth had preceded the science, yet the science had made the myth plausible in retrospect. It was as though imagination itself had been a premonition of discovery. Still, others remained grounded. No ancient civilization, they insisted, possessed the means to create such artifacts. The skulls were not Atlantean computers or alien devices. They were the products of human imagination, and that, in its own right, was enough. For imagination, after all, is the root of invention. Every breakthrough begins as belief. Cognitive scientists offered a yet another angle, that the skulls acted as mirrors of the collective psyche. Their transparency invited projection. Each observer saw what they needed to see. To the rational, they were proof of credulity. To the spiritual, proof of mystery. And thus they endured, not as facts, but as reflections of the endless dialogue between skepticism and faith. In this light, the crystal skulls were no longer about aliens or hoaxes or hidden technologies. They were about us, about our hunger for wonder in a world increasingly defined by data and doubt. The story was not ancient, but eternal. humanity, gazing into the mirror of the unknown, searching for its own reflection.
As the world entered the era of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and digital consciousness, the crystal skulls began to feel strangely modern once again. They no longer stood merely as artifacts of mystery, but as mirrors for the new age, an age in which humanity sought to understand the essence of mind, memory, and meaning through the lens of technology. The old questions returned in new form. Could consciousness be stored, transmitted, or copied? If data could live forever within crystal lattices, what did that say about the boundaries between life and machine? The skulls, silent and ancient-looking, now seemed prophetic once more. They had long been said to hold memory, to whisper knowledge, to connect the living and the dead. And suddenly, in a world of servers and clouds, such metaphors did not seem so far-fetched. On online forums, documentaries, and podcasts, the legend adapted. Believers began to describe the skulls as symbols of a deeper truth, that information itself is eternal. Just as quartz stores the pulse of a clock, perhaps the universe stores the pulse of thought. Energy never disappears, only changes form. And so, they said, consciousness, too, must find new vessels. Whether through stone or silicon, life leaves its imprint. Philosophers and scientists alike began to explore this intersection. The concept of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, gained traction. If matter itself had awareness, even at the smallest scale, then perhaps the line between the living and the inanimate was not as sharp as once thought. The skulls, in this view, were metaphors of awakening, reminders that even the coldest quartz might shimmer with the faint echo of awareness. Across the world, gatherings of modern seekers continued. They met in deserts, forests, temples, and small community halls, placing skulls of all sizes in circles of light. They meditated not to summon aliens or gods, but to listen, to the stillness, to the resonance, to the subtle hum of presence. For many, it was less about the object itself and more about what it invoked: connection, stillness, and the feeling of being part of something vast. Science could not measure that feeling, but neither could it deny its power. Meanwhile, museums that had once dismissed the skulls as curiosities began to present them differently, no longer as hoaxes, but as windows into the human imagination, artifacts of belief, not deceit. The British Museum, the Smithsonian, and private collectors reframed them as examples of how myths evolve, how the hunger for mystery shapes history as much as discovery does. They became case studies in the anthropology of wonder, proof that truth and beauty often coexist in paradox. In academic circles, the crystal skulls entered discussions of cultural narrative. Scholars noted that the legend had adapted across time and medium, from colonial fantasy to New Age spirituality, from cinema spectacle to digital myth. Each era saw in the skulls what it needed to see, a reflection of its own questions. For the Victorians, they represented lost empires. For the modern age, lost meanings. And in that sense, their mystery was indestructible. Even when debunked, they refused to vanish. Yet the story was not only one of imagination. For those who had stood before a skull, who had seen light bend and fracture through its surface, there remained an undeniable presence, something calm, something vast. Perhaps it was the awareness of time itself condensed into the clarity of stone. Perhaps it was the silent recognition that, like quartz, consciousness, too, is shaped by pressure, by the slow sculpting forces of existence. It is here in this intersection between the known and the unknown that the legend of the crystal skulls takes on its truest form. They may not be relics of alien origin or lost continents, but they are vessels of a different kind, vessels for the imagination, the longing, and the awe that define humanity. They remind us that even when mystery is unmasked, its power remains. Some scientists now suggest that our fascination with the skulls reflects an evolutionary impulse. We are drawn to faces, to patterns that resemble life, because we are wired to seek connection. To see a face, even in stone, is to encounter the possibility of meaning. And when that face is carved in pure crystal, flawless and eternal, we glimpse the dream of immortality itself. The skulls endure because they balance contradictions. They are ancient in appearance, but modern in origin. False in fact, yet true in feeling. They represent the collision of reason and reverence, deception and devotion, artifice and art. In their silence, they speak of our endless need to bridge the material and the spiritual, to find the divine within the human hand.
As we near the end of this journey, the question lingers like a shimmer in quartz. What are the crystal skulls truly? Alien relics? No. Ancient artifacts? Probably not. But symbols of something deeper, undeniably. For within their flawless faces, we see the reflection of our own. The human story has always danced between truth and imagination. From cave paintings to telescopes, from myths of gods to the mathematics of galaxies, our species has never stopped weaving meaning from mystery. The crystal skulls sit precisely at that threshold, the borderland where evidence fades and wonder begins. They are not messages from the stars, but from ourselves, carved into form by our endless hunger to understand the unseen. Perhaps that is why they continue to mesmerize us long after their origins have been exposed, because what they truly embody is not deception, but desire, the desire to touch eternity, to make the invisible visible, to hold the infinite in our hands. They remind us that belief is not the enemy of reason, it is the seed of curiosity. Before science can prove, someone must first imagine. In every age, people have turned to stone for remembrance. Tombs, statues, monuments, all meant to preserve the echo of the living. The crystal skulls carry that impulse to its most poetic extreme. They are skulls, symbols of death, yet they are made of light, of crystal clarity, death and immortality fused into one. They whisper that what ends in flesh may continue in spirit, that memory can outlast matter. And so we continue to gaze into them, searching for reflections that change as we do. To one observer, they are art. To another, portals. To another still, frauds exposed by science. Each interpretation reveals more about the observer than about the skull itself. They are mirrors, not messengers. They show us that truth and myth are not opposites, but partners in the human experience. We need both to navigate the mystery of existence. Even the debunkers, in their own way, keep the legend alive. For every myth unmasked, another arises, shaped by new questions.
The skulls persist because they occupy that delicate space where certainty dissolves, a reminder that even in an age of algorithms, mystery endures. They tell us that knowledge does not end wonder, it deepens it. The more we learn, the more vast the unknown becomes. Perhaps that is their final message. Not revelation, but reflection. Not proof of gods or aliens, but proof of the human soul's refusal to stop asking why. In every era, we carve our questions into the materials of our time, into stone, into crystal, into code, and through them we speak across centuries, saying, "We were here, we wondered, we dreamed." When you next see a crystal skull glinting under museum lights, remember this: it is not just quartz you are looking at. It is the condensed story of curiosity itself, the eternal dialogue between what we know and what we can only imagine. The skull looks back at you not with answers, but with invitation. To look deeper, to keep asking, to never let mystery die. And perhaps that is what Echoes of Eras truly means. That every age leaves behind its own voice, its own symbol of wonder, calling us to listen. The crystal skulls are one such echo, a whisper from both the past and the future, reminding us that belief and knowledge, myth and reason are not enemies, but reflections of the same luminous quest. To understand who we are and what lies beyond the glassy veil of existence. The skulls remain, unblinking, eternal, polished faces of time itself. Whether they were born from hoax or hope, from commerce or cosmic dream, their purpose endures. They make us pause. They make us think. And in that pause, in that quiet space between question and answer, perhaps we glimpse the one truth that matters most. That mystery, fragile, shimmering, and unbroken, is what makes us human.